The day I was thrown into the pond to die, the entire town came to watch the spectacle. They said the #1 scholar's wife of the Pei family had violated her marital vows, committed adultery, and been caught red-handed. My husband, Pei Wenshuan, that gentle and refined man who once promised me a lifetime of fidelity, was the one who personally pressed me into the icy cold pig cage. There was not a shred of mercy in his eyes, only rage and disgust at having his reputation tarnished. Shen Qingning. The Pei family has treated you well, yet you committed such a shameful act to disgrace our clan. Today, I shall cleanse the family of your filth. I struggled frantically, desperate to tell him I was innocent, but the ragged cloth stuffed in my mouth only let me emit muffled whimpers. The frigid river water flooded my nose and mouth. In the last moment before my consciousness faded, I saw my 5-year-old son Pei Yuan pinned tightly to the ground. The clear eyes that mirrored my sinking figure were filled with towering hatred. When I opened my eyes again, I had become a wandering spirit floating above the Pei mansion. I watched as Pei Wenshuan tied my son to the locust tree in the courtyard like a stray dog, lashing him mercilessly with a horsewhip. You bastard. Your shameless mother is dead, you don't deserve to live either. The tender skin of his back was crisscrossed with bloody welts, yet my Yuan didn't make a single sound. He just stared fixedly at his father, his gaze not that of a child, but of a lone wolf lying dormant in the shadows. I was dead, dead in the 6th year of my marriage to the Pei family, dead on a bone-chilling early winter day. My soul drifted lightly, trapped within the walls of the Pei mansion by an invisible force, unable to go anywhere. I could only watch helplessly as everything unfolded like a grotesque, tragic farce. I saw my mother-in-law, the Lady Pei who had always praised me for my virtue and obedience, directing the servants to inventory all my dowry valuables one by one. Her face was twisted into an undisguised greedy grin. This white jade guanyin is a treasure from the previous dynasty, put it away carefully, and those kingfisher feather hairpins would look perfect on Rumei. The Rumei she spoke of was my distant cousin, Liu Rumei. At that moment, she was dressed in a plain white robe. Nestled in my husband Pei Wenshuan's arms, comforting him softly. Cousin, don't grieve too deeply. Sister, she was just confused for a moment. You still have me, and you still have Yuan. Pei Wenshuan held her close, his face filled with sorrow, but his voice was as cold as ice. Don't mention that bastard. My heart, or what remained of my consciousness, twisted violently with pain. Bastard. That was his own flesh and blood. I drifted into the courtyard and saw my Yuan, my 5-year-old boy, tied to the old locust tree with a coarse hemp rope. The early winter wind cut like a knife through his thin clothes. His small face was purplish with cold, his lips cracked and bleeding. The servants passing by avoided him like the plague, casting disdainful and loathing glances at him from time to time. That's him, the son of that adulteress. Even at such a young age, he looks like a troublemaker, just like his mother. The master said no one is allowed to give him food. Let him reflect on his mother's sins. My Yuan, my precious son whom I had protected from every bump and bruise, whom I had cherished like a jewel, had become the lowliest creature in the entire mansion. He did not cry, nor did he throw a tantrum. He just stood quietly there, his tiny body straight as a resilient young pine tree. He stared at the embracing couple in the main hall, at the servants pointing fingers at him, in those eyes that should have been filled with childish innocence. There burned a flame that belied his years. It was hatred. I had never imagined that such a word would ever appear in the heart of my 5-year-old son. I wanted to rush over to hold him like a madwoman, to shield him from even the slightest gust of wind with my insubstantial form, but time and again, my body passed right through his. There was nothing I could do. I could only watch, helpless and desolate. As night fell, the Pei mansion was brightly lit, filled with endless laughter and chatter. Liu Rumei had personally cooked a table full of Pei Wenshuan's favorite dishes. Lady Pei took her hand, calling her affectionately my good daughter-in-law. No one remembered the child tied up in the courtyard, who had not eaten or drunk for an entire day and night. No one remembered me, the unfaithful first wife whom they had personally drowned in the icy river just days ago. In the middle of the night, a light winter rain began to drizzle down. The rain soaked Yuan's hair and clothes. He shivered violently from the cold, and finally, his small body collapsed slowly to the ground. I screamed in agony, but my voice dissipated into the wind and rain, just as I thought my child would die from his own father's indifference. A thin figure holding an oil paper umbrella sneaked quietly over to the locust tree. It was the mute old woman who was in charge of cleaning the mansion. She had been my dowry servant, and the only person in the Pei mansion who still had a shred of kindness left for me. She untied the rope from Yuan's body, lifted his small form into her arms, took off her own relatively dry outer coat, and wrapped it tightly around him. Then she pulled a hard, stone-cold steamed bun still warm from her bosom and stuffed it into Yuan's hand. Yuan seemed to have frozen stiff. He stared blankly at the mute old woman, not moving. The mute old woman grew anxious, gesturing frantically with her hands to urge him to eat quickly. After a long while, Yuan slowly raised his hand and began to nibble on the rock-hard cold bun. Bite by bite, he ate slowly and carefully, as if it were a delicacy fit for royalty. 2 lines of clear tears slid down his dirty cheeks, mixing with the crumbs of the bun in his mouth. It was a bitter, astringent taste. Watching him, my soul felt as if it were being torn apart by 1,000 knives. Thus, my spirit remained trapped in this tiny space, enduring a slow, agonizing torment that would last for 10 long years. 2. The 7th day after my death was the traditional day for the soul to return home. Ordinarily, the family should have set up an altar for me and burned paper money in my memory, but instead, the entire Pei mansion was decorated with lanterns and streamers, bursting with joy and celebration, because today, Pei Wenxuan was formally marrying Liu Rumei as his wife. He couldn't even wait for the 3-month mourning period to end, using the excuse of warding off bad luck with a wedding to make Liu Rumei his legal wife. It was utterly ridiculous. My bones were not yet cold, and he was in such a hurry to ward off bad luck with a wedding held in the wake of my death. The wedding was not overly grand, but it had all the proper rituals and ceremonies required. Pei Wenxuan wore a bright red wedding robe, which made his hypocritical face look even more handsome and elegant. Liu Rumei was adorned in a phoenix coronet and red bridal gown, her face blooming with a radiant smile. They bowed to the elders in the main hall, accepting congratulations from everyone present. Meanwhile, my son Pei Yuan was locked up in the firewood shed. I drifted into that dark, damp firewood shed and saw him curled up in a pile of straw in the corner, still wearing that thin, tattered old robe. He seemed to have come down with a high fever. His small face was flushed bright red, and he muttered deliriously to himself. I leaned closer to listen. Mother, mother. Each soft call was like a blunt knife, cutting repeatedly into my already shattered heart. Yuan, mother is here, mother is right here. I stretched out my hand futilely, wanting to touch his forehead, but my hand only brought a cold, empty nothingness. The boisterous laughter of the guests and the cheerful sound of wedding music drifted in from outside, a stark contrast to the deathly silence of the firewood shed. Suddenly, the door to the shed was kicked open with a loud bang. A drunken steward stumbled in with 2 servants in tow. You little bastard, the madam wants you to come over and kowtow to her with tea. The steward belched drunkenly, his face twisted with contempt. Yuan seemed to be delirious with fever, not responding, enraged. The steward stepped forward and kicked Yuan hard in the ribs. I'm talking to you. Are you deaf? Yuan's small body rolled to the side like a rag doll. He let out a muffled groan of pain and finally regained some clarity. He lifted his head, and those pitch-black eyes stared fixedly at the steward. The coldness in that gaze made the steward take an involuntary step back, but soon, his anger flared up again. How dare you glare at me, you little bastard, you're getting bold. He gestured to the servants, drag him to the main hall. In this way, my son, burning with a high fever, was roughly dragged by 2 grown men into the joyfully decorated main hall. Liu Rumei sat on the honored seat, and when she saw Pei Yuan being dragged in, a flash of triumphant malice flickered in her eyes. She picked up a cup of tea and said softly to Pei Wenxuan, "Husband, it's time for Yuan to offer me tea. From now on, I shall be his mother." Pei Wenxuan didn't even glance at Pei Yuan, smiling gently at Liu Rumei instead. "Very well, you may handle it as you see fit." A servant stuffed the teacup into Yuan's hand and forced his head down, making him kneel on the ground. "Hurry up, offer tea to your new mother." Pei Yuan knelt on the floor, his body swaying unsteadily from weakness. He stared at the tea sloshing in the cup, then looked up at the seemingly perfect couple sitting on the high seat. His father was gazing at the woman beside him with eyes full of doting affection. That woman was wearing the phoenix coronet and red bridal gown that should have belonged to my mother, occupying the position that should have been mine. Suddenly, Pei Yuan smiled. It was an extremely eerie smile for a 5-year-old child, sending chills down everyone's spine. He picked up the teacup, stumbled to his feet, and walked step by step toward Liu Rumei. Liu Rumei looked at him, wearing a fake smile of maternal kindness. "Good boy, come here quickly." Pei Yuan walked up to her. Everyone thought he was going to offer her the tea, but in the next second, he raised his hand and splashed the entire cup of scalding hot tea onto Liu Rumei's delicate face. Liu Rumei let out a shrill scream of agony, clutching her face as she collapsed into Pei Wenshuan's arms. Everyone was completely stunned into silence. Pei Wenshuan flew into a violent rage. He kicked Pei Yuan hard to the ground, roaring, "Beast, how dare you harm your mother?" Pei Yuan fell to the floor. Coughing up a mouthful of blood, he lifted his head, grinned bitterly, and shouted at the top of his lungs, every word dripping with hatred. "I have no mother. My mother is dead. You killed her. You are all murderers. You wicked woman, you are not fit to be my mother." The entire hall fell into a deathly hush. All the guests stared at this bizarre family with eyes wide with shock and complicated emotions. Pei Wenshuan's face turned alternately green and white, as if he had been slapped hard in the face countless times in public. Number 3. From that day on, Pei Yuan's life descended into complete hell. He was locked in the ancestral hall for 3 full days and nights without a drop of water or a grain of rice. By the time he was let out, he was so emaciated he was barely recognizable. His high fever had turned into a severe illness, and he coughed day and night as if he would cough up his heart and lungs. Liu Rumei publicly claimed to have invited the best doctors to treat him, but in reality, she only had the mansion's incompetent physician casually prescribe a few bowls of bitter coptis soup to force him to drink. The medicine was horribly bitter, yet Mai Yuan drank it all without a single change in his expression every time. He knew that only by surviving could he have hope. His illness dragged on for a long time before finally subsiding, but it left him with a chronic condition every winter. His cough would worsen drastically. Having become the legitimate mistress of the Pei mansion, Liu Rumei began tormenting Pei Yuan in every way she could think of. Cutting his rations became a daily occurrence, while other young masters and young ladies ate delicate pastries and wore luxurious clothes. Mai Yuan always had only a bowl of coarse rice and a set of faded, worn-out clothes. The servants followed her lead, arbitrarily beating and scolding him whenever they pleased. I once witnessed the steward's son, a chubby boy 1 year younger than Yuan, pointing at Yuan's nose and calling him a bastard, then dumping a bowl of dog food over his head. Yuan did not fight back, nor did he speak a word, he just endured it silently, then washed his hair and face with icy cold river water as if nothing had happened. But I knew that every insult, every pain, was like a venomous thorn piercing deeply into his young heart, taking root and sprouting, waiting for the day when it would grow into a towering tree and repay all the suffering inflicted on him 100-fold. He became increasingly silent and inconspicuous. He was like a shadow in the mansion, appearing and disappearing without a sound. Everyone almost forgot that the Pei mansion even had such an eldest legitimate son. Pei Wenshuan ignored him completely. In his eyes, Pei Yuan was the greatest stain on his life, a blemish on his glorious reputation as the top scholar. He hated seeing Pei Yuan because it reminded him of me, his unfaithful wife. A few years later, Liu Rumei also gave birth to a son, named Pei Lang. Pei Lang's birth made Pei Yuan's situation even more difficult. Pei Wenshuan poured all his fatherly love into this youngest son, doting on him endlessly and placing high hopes on him. Pei Yuan, on the other hand, became completely redundant. When he was 7 years old, it was time for him to start his education. Pei Wenshuan invited the best scholar in the city to teach Pei Lang. Yuan also wanted to study, He secretly hid outside the schoolroom window to listen to the scholar's lectures. When he was discovered, Pei Wenxuan reprimanded him harshly in front of everyone. "You, the son of an adulteress, what right do you have to study? Are you worthy? Get back to your courtyard at once." I watched as Yuan's small fists clenched tightly, his nails digging into his flesh. He did not argue, he just looked at Pei Wenxuan deeply, then turned and left. After that day, he never approached the schoolroom again. I thought he had given up, until one night, I saw him sneak into Pei Wenxuan's study. Pei Wenxuan's study was his most prized possession, housing 10,000 volumes of books. He never allowed anyone to enter casually, especially not Pei Yuan. I watched as my Yuan, by the faint moonlight streaming through the window, stood on tiptoe and pulled out a dusty copy of *3-character classic from the bottom shelf. He hugged the book tightly to his chest as if it were a treasure, then slipped out silently, back in his dilapidated small courtyard. He lit a dim oil lamp. By the tiny flame, he struggled to recognize each character in the book one by one. When he encountered a character he did not know, he traced it repeatedly on the ground with charcoal until he memorized it. It turned out that he had never given up. During the day, he helped the mansion's servants with chores, chopping firewood, carrying water, sweeping the courtyard in exchange for a little leftover food. He listened to the literate servants read family letters aloud, secretly memorizing a few characters here and there. He went to the kitchen to help the mute old woman tend the fire, and she would secretly teach him to write characters on the ground with a fire poker. In this most clumsy and primitive way, he embarked on his journey of learning. Day after day, year after year, the books in the study were stolen by him one by one, then returned one by one. The charcoal writing on the ground was erased and rewritten and erased. His hands, from years of hard labor, were covered in calluses and wounds. His body, from malnutrition, was thinner and shorter than other boys his age, but his eyes grew brighter and brighter, like stars in the dark night, filled with wisdom and perseverance. Watching him, I often wondered what my Yuan would have been like if I had been there. He would have sat in a bright, clean schoolroom, wearing neat clothes, studying with the best scholars. He would have grown up carefree, becoming a scholar as accomplished as his father, or even more so. Instead of being like he was now, a weed struggling to absorb nutrients and grow upward in a dark corner. But weeds often have the strongest vitality. Once they see the sun, they will spread like wildfire, covering the entire earth. #4. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. In those 10 years, I watched Pei Yuan grow from a 5-year-old child into a 15-year-old youth. He had grown tall, his facial features had gradually taken shape, and there was a faint resemblance to Pei Wenxuan and me in his eyebrows and eyes, but he had an edge and coldness that Pei Wenxuan lacked. He remained silent all year round, and the people in the mansion barely noticed his existence, seeing that he was docile and posed no threat. Liu Rumei gradually relaxed her oppression of him. Only occasionally, when she remembered him, she would hurl a few sarcastic remarks at him. Seeing his unresponsive face, she would find it boring and leave him alone. Pei Wenxuan's official career, however, went from strength to strength, relying on his reputation as the top scholar and the support of his father-in-law's family, Liu Rumei's maiden family. He was promoted to the position of Vice Minister of Personnel, a third-rank official, making him a prominent figure in the capital. The Pei family's prestige flourished day by day. Everyone was immersed in this glory, everyone except me and my son. At the age of 15, Pei Yuan made a decision. He was going to leave the Pei family. That day, for the first and last time, he took the initiative to kneel before Pei Wenxuan. "Father," he said, his voice hoarse with the unique immaturity of a youth, yet calm without the slightest ripple, "your son is already 15. I no longer wish to live off the family's grain for free. I beg you to allow me to leave home and make my own way in the world." Pei Wenxuan was teasing his beloved youngest son Pei Lang. When he heard this, he did not even bother to lift his eyelids. "Oh, where do you intend to go? To join the army?" Pei Wenxuan finally looked at him, his eyes filled with scrutiny and disdain. "Join the army? With your weak constitution, you can barely lift a sword. Going to the army would be suicide." Pei Yuan remained kneeling straight. neither humble nor arrogant. Life and death are fated. Pei Wenxuan sneered. He naturally did not believe that Pei Yuan had any ambition to achieve merit in the military. He only thought that Pei Yuan could no longer bear the life in the mansion and wanted to run away. Very well, without this stain lingering in front of his eyes, he could live in peace. Very well, go if you wish. But remember this, once you step out of this gate, you are no longer a member of the Pei family. Whether you live or die has nothing to do with the Pei mansion. In the future, you are not allowed to use my name, Pei Wenxuan, to deceive others outside. He was severing his father-son relationship with Pei Yuan. Your son understands. Pei Yuan kowtowed 3 times calmly. Each kowtow was loud and resolute. Thank you, father, for raising me all these years. The last 8 words were almost squeezed out between his teeth. I watched his straight back as he slowly stood up and walked out of the Pei mansion's main gate without the slightest hesitation. My heart ached so much I could barely breathe. I knew that he did not really want to join the army. He just needed a reason, a legitimate excuse to leave this cage. On the day he left, only one thin figure secretly wiped away tears behind the door. It was the mute old woman. She had stuffed a few boiled eggs and a few pieces of broken silver she had saved over half her life into Pei Yuan's bundle. Pei Yuan bowed deeply to her, a gesture of gratitude for the only warmth he had ever received in this cold mansion. The young man's thin figure disappeared at the end of the long street. For the first time, my spirit felt panic. I was trapped in this mansion. I could not follow him. I did not know where my Yuan was going, or how he would survive alone in the world. Would I lose all news of him forever? Day and night, I floated at the main gate of the Pei mansion, staring in the direction he had left, my heart filled with unease and torment. Over the next 3 years, I received no news of Pei Yuan. He was like a stone thrown into the sea, not causing the slightest ripple. The people of the Pei mansion had long forgotten him. Pei Wenxuan's official fortune continued to rise, and he was promoted to Minister of Personnel. Liu Rumei's son Pei Lang had also grown into a handsome young man. Relying on his father's power, he spent his days cockfighting and dog racing in the capital, becoming an uneducated playboy. Number 5. The entire Pei mansion was immersed in a false prosperity. This continued until the spring. 3 years later, the results of the new imperial examination were announced, and for a moment, the entire capital was in an uproar, because the top scholar of this year was too legendary. His name was Pei Yuan. At just 18 years old, he had achieved the rare feat of topping all 3 rounds of the examination, becoming the youngest top scholar since the founding of the dynasty. What made him even more legendary was that no one knew anything about his family background. All people knew was that he had come to the capital alone 3 years earlier, living in a dilapidated temple in the southern part of the city. During the day, he copied books for others. At night, he studied relentlessly without pause. When the news reached the Pei mansion, Pei Wenxuan was drinking and enjoying himself with his colleagues. The moment he heard the name Pei Yuan, the wine cup in his hand clattered to the ground. Why, you said, what is the name of the new top scholar? Pei Wenxuan's voice was trembling. Master, his name is Pei Yuan, single given name Yuan. Pei Wenxuan's face turned as pale as a sheet in an instant. He stumbled out, snatching the copied imperial announcement from the servant's hand. When he saw that familiar yet unfamiliar name standing proudly at the top, his entire body froze. It was really him. It was the son he had driven out of the family, the son he had regarded as the greatest shame of his life. The entire Pei mansion exploded with commotion. Liu Rumei clutched her handkerchief in disbelief. How is this possible? That little bastard, how could he become the top scholar? Lady Pei was so excited she stood up from her chair. A top scholar? Our Pei family has produced another top scholar. Hurry, send someone to bring him back at once. This is a great honor that brings glory to our ancestors. They forgot how they had driven Pei Yuan out of the family. They forgot the words, whether you live or die has nothing to do with the Pei mansion. Now, Pei Yuan was the radiant new top scholar, a unicorn talent who could bring unparalleled glory to the Pei family. They took it for granted that Pei Yuan should return, should recognize his ancestors and rejoin the clan. Pei Wenxuan personally led a group of people, prepared rich gifts, and set off in a mighty procession to the dilapidated temple where Pei Yuan had lived. I waited anxiously, hoping that Pei Wenxuan would find him, yet also hoping he would not. My emotions were extremely complicated. I was afraid that my Yuan, overwhelmed by this sudden glory, would forget the blood feud of those years. I was afraid that he would soften his heart at Pei Wenxuan's false words of father-son affection. When Pei Wenxuan arrived at the dilapidated temple, it was already empty. Only a note was left on the shabby table. There were only 8 words on it, written with sharp, forceful strokes that seemed to penetrate the paper. On the day we severed ties, all kindness ended. Pei Wenxuan stared at the note, trembling with anger, rebellious. This is sheer rebellion. He refuses to recognize me as his father. I gave him life and raised him, and now that he has achieved success, he wants to cast aside the Pei family. What a wolf-hearted ingrate. He flew into a rage in the temple, completely forgetting his own words from years ago. Watching his hypocritical face, I felt nothing but overwhelming disgust. Unable to find Pei Yuan, Pei Wenxuan had no choice but to return dejectedly. He used his power as Minister of Personnel to try to hinder Pei Yuan's official career, but he soon discovered that he could do nothing at all, because Pei Yuan's answers during the palace examination had deeply pleased the emperor. The emperor praised him endlessly, immediately appointing him as a 6th-rank compiler of the Hanlin Academy and personally selecting him to be a lecturer to the crown prince. What an extraordinary favor! Everyone knew that this young top scholar had an unlimited future ahead of him. Countless noble families wanted to marry their daughters to him, eager to win over this rising star in the court, but Pei Yuan refused them all. He did not even move into the top scholar's mansion awarded by the emperor. Instead, he found a quiet small courtyard to live in alone. Except for attending court, he rarely went out and refused to associate with anyone. He was like an isolated star, cold, bright, and exuding an aura of inaccessibility. The Pei family sent people to his door repeatedly, trying to persuade him to recognize his ancestors and rejoin the clan, but he turned them all away. The last time, Pei Wenxuan went in person. Waiting outside the gate for 3 hours without even catching a glimpse of Pei Yuan, the steward only brought out a message. Minister Pei, my master says that those who walk different paths cannot work together. He has no relationship with the Pei mansion anymore. Now, the entire capital knew. The new top scholar Pei Yuan and Minister of Personnel Pei Wenxuan had turned against each other as father and son. For a time, rumors spread everywhere. Some said Pei Yuan was ungrateful, abandoning his biological father after achieving success. Others said there must be hidden reasons behind the rift. To save his reputation, Pei Wenxuan began openly and secretly talking about his hardships on various occasions. He spoke of how he had worked so hard to raise his son alone, how his son had been rebellious, running away from home over a trivial matter, and now holding a grudge against him. He talked about me, his unfaithful wife, and how I had dealt a huge blow to his life. He portrayed himself as a poor father, betrayed by his wife and abandoned by his son. For a time, public opinion began to favor him. Even in the court, some censors impeached Pei Yuan for unfilial piety, arguing that his moral character was flawed and that he was unfit to hold office. Watching all this, I was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. My Yuan, he refused to explain anything. He just endured all the accusations and criticisms in silence. I saw him sitting alone in his study, staring at the moonlight outside the window, staying there all night. His lonely figure shattered my heart. Just as I thought he would be crushed by these rumors, things took an unexpected turn. Someone no one could have imagined stepped forward. #6. The person who stepped forward was the mute old woman. After Pei Yuan left, Liu Rumei had found an excuse to drive the mute old woman out of the Pei mansion as well. Over the years, she had made a living begging outside the city. When she heard that Pei Yuan had become the top scholar and was being accused of unfilial piety, this old woman who had never read a book in her life and could not even speak made a shocking decision. She was going to beat the Denguen drum. The Denguen drum was located outside the Meridian Gate, and could only be beaten by those with great grievances. A ragged old beggar woman wanting to beat the Denguen drum was in itself a huge news. The moment the drumbeat sounded, the entire capital shook. The prefect of Jingzhou personally heard the case. In the courtroom, the mute old woman knelt on the ground, trembling all over, yet her eyes were firm. She could not speak. But she held out a complaint. She had begged a down-on-his-luck scholar to write the complaint word by word according to her gestures. The complaint clearly detailed all the inhumane abuse Pei Yuan had suffered in the Pei mansion over those 10 years, being tied up in the courtyard, nearly freezing and starving to death, having a high fever that would not subside, yet being ignored by everyone, being treated like a servant, arbitrarily beaten and cursed, having his food rations cut by his stepmother, left with insufficient clothes to keep warm, being scolded as a bastard by his own father, deprived of the right to study. Each accusation was shocking. At the end of the complaint, there was also a special testimony, a series of drawings that the mute old woman had sketched on the ground with a fire poker. The drawings showed a thin little boy having dog food poured over his head by a chubby boy. They showed a little boy secretly hiding outside a window on a cold winter night, listening to the sound of reading from inside. They showed a little boy writing characters repeatedly on the ground with charcoal by the light of a dim oil lamp. The drawing style was childish and clumsy, yet full of impact. The entire courtroom fell into deathly silence. Everyone was stunned into speechlessness by this silent accusation. The prefect of Jingzhou summoned Pei Wenshuan to the court. When Pei Wenshuan saw the complaint and the drawings, his face turned as white as paper. He denied everything vehemently. Nonsense. This is nothing but slander from a malicious servant. I, Pei Wenshuan, am an official of the court, well versed in the teachings of the sages. How could I do such beastly things? Then why does the top scholar refuse to recognize you? The prefect asked. He was instigated by evil people, holding a grudge against me. As Pei Wenshuan continued to prevaricate, a cold voice came from outside the courtroom. Whether it is slander or not can be verified with one look. Everyone turned around. A young official dressed in a crimson official robe walked in slowly. He stood tall and straight, with a face as handsome as jade, yet his eyes were as cold as ice. It was the new top scholar, Pei Yuan. Everyone knelt down to pay their respects, but Pei Wenshuan's body trembled uncontrollably. Pei Yuan walked to the center of the courtroom, bowed to the prefect, then, in front of everyone, slowly unbuttoned his official robe to reveal the undergarment beneath. He turned around, exposing his back to the crowd. Gasp! A collective intake of breath echoed through the courtroom. Covering that not so broad back were crisscrossing scars, whip lashes, burns, stick wounds, new scars overlapping old ones, layer upon layer, leaving almost no unmarred skin. These hideous scars silently told the story of the painful past this young top scholar had endured. Pei Yuan's voice rang out calmly, yet each word struck everyone's heart like a heavy hammer. When I was 5 years old, my father whipped me with a horsewhip, calling me a bastard born of a shameless mother. When I was 7 years old, I accidentally fell into an icy lake in winter. My stepmother said I was mischievous and punished me to kneel in the snow all night. My legs nearly became useless. When I was 10 years old, I was framed by my stepmother's son for stealing her pearl hairpin. My father ordered me to be beaten 30 times with a stick, and I lay in bed for a month. For 10 years. I ate the leftover, spoiled food of the servants. I wore the old clothes discarded by the mansion's boys. I never attended school for a single day. Every character I know, I learned by peeking, listening secretly, and stealing books to study. Minister Pei, he turned around, staring directly at Pei Wenshuan, whose face had lost all color, his eyes filled with impenetrable coldness. Do you still think this is slander? Pei Wenshuan's lips trembled, and he could not say a single word. The truth was revealed. The entire capital was in an uproar. Number 7. The more people had sympathized with Pei Wenshuan before, the more they despised him now. Labels like hypocrite, child abuser, and beastly poured down on him. Memorials impeaching him from the censorate flooded the imperial throne like snowflakes. The emperor was enraged and ordered a thorough investigation. In the end, Pei Wenshuan was dismissed from his post as Minister of Personnel. Demoted to the 5th rank as Director of the Imperial Academy, and ordered to remain confined to his residence to reflect on his crimes. For a proud man who valued his reputation above all else, this was worse than death. Pei Yuan, however, was not affected at all. On the contrary, his suffering and perseverance won him more sympathy and admiration. The emperor favored him even more, recognizing his resilience as a sign of great potential. The storm ended with Pei Yuan's complete victory. He took the mute old woman to his mansion and cared for her diligently. Watching my Yuan finally clear his name and reclaim partial justice, my heart was filled with mixed emotions. I knew this was only the beginning. He had endured for 10 years and planned for 3. What he wanted was far more than just ruining Pei Wenshuan's reputation. He wanted everyone who had ever hurt him, who had ever hurt me, to pay the most painful price. A greater storm was brewing. #8. After Pei Wenshuan's demotion, the Pei family's fortunes plummeted. The once thriving minister's mansion, where visitors had queued at the gate, now stood desolate with few guests. The more glamorous Liu Rumei had been in noble ladies' circles before, the more embarrassed she was now. Everywhere she went, people pointed fingers at her behind her back. She blamed everything on Pei Yuan. "It's all that little bastard, that jinx. We should have strangled him to death back then," she shouted hysterically at home. Pei Wenshuan also drowned his sorrows in alcohol all day. When drunk, he would beat and kick Liu Rumei and Pei Lang. The entire Pei mansion was shrouded in gloom and despair. They had tried to go to Pei Yuan, sometimes to beg for mercy, sometimes to threaten, but they couldn't even get past the gate of his mansion. Meanwhile, my Yuan advanced steadily in the court. Though young, he handled affairs with remarkable sophistication and prudence. Whether dealing with government affairs or navigating relationships with colleagues, he was effortless. He rarely spoke, but every word hit the mark. He never took sides or formed cliques, yet no faction dared to underestimate him. The emperor trusted him more and more, and the crown prince relied on him increasingly. In just 5 years, he had risen from a 6th-rank compiler of the Hanlin Academy to the 3rd-rank Minister of Justice. The Ministry of Justice oversaw all judicial affairs in the realm. When he took that position, I knew his sword of revenge was finally ready to be unsheathed. Over these 5 years, he had never given up investigating my case. I watched as he used his authority at the Ministry of Justice to secretly review all the case files from back then. He found the county magistrate who had presided over my trial, but the magistrate had accidentally drowned a year earlier. He then tracked down the peddler who had falsely accused me of adultery, but the peddler's entire family had been burned to death in a fire a few years ago. All leads were broken. I watched him sit in his study for nights on end, staring at those yellowed files, his brows furrowed in deep concentration. I was frantic with worry. I knew the truth. I knew who had masterminded everything. It was Liu Rumei. She had bribed the peddler, forged letters, and drugged my sleeping tonic to create the illusion of adultery. I remembered the face of the maid who had brought me the soup back then. Her name was Xiao Kui. Shortly after the incident, Liu Rumei had found an excuse to send her back to her hometown, Li Village, 30 miles outside the city. I tried desperately to tell him, to shout in his ear, but he couldn't hear me. I could only watch helplessly as he fell into dead ends again and again. This powerlessness drove me almost insane. Just as he was at his wit's end, an unexpected person brought him a breakthrough: his half-brother, Pei Lang. Over the years, Pei Lang had been spoiled rotten by Pei Wenshuan and Liu Rumei. He indulged in drinking, gambling, whoring, and all manner of vices. He owed a huge gambling debt and was being chased relentlessly by his creditors. He went home to ask Liu Rumei for money, but she was also short of funds due to Pei Wenshuan's demotion and couldn't give him enough. Desperate, Pei Lang thought of his lofty top scholar brother. He secretly went to the Ministry of Justice, hoping to beg Pei Yuan for money. Naturally, Pei Yuan refused to see him. Humiliated and enraged by the rejection, Pei Lang shouted insults outside the gate. "Pei Yuan, you ungrateful white-eyed wolf, don't you forget, if it weren't for my mother, you wouldn't be where you are today. Your mother, that bitch, deserved to die long ago." He cursed recklessly, but inadvertently let slip a crucial remark. "You really think your mother was innocent? Let me tell you, my mother planned everything. The peddler, the letter, It was all my mother's doing. Ha ha ha, your fool of a father actually believed it and drowned your mother in the pond with his own hands. Karma, this is all karma. He thought he was just venting his anger. But he didn't know that every word he said was clearly heard by Pei Yuan's confidants hiding in the shadows. When the confidant relayed these words to Pei Yuan, I saw a crack appear for the first time on his ever-icy face. The wolf hairbrush in his hand was crushed into pieces. Ink dripped onto the rice paper like a thick drop of blood. His eyes were filled with towering anger and murderous intent, as if he would burn the entire world to ashes. He had waited so many years, investigated for so many years, and the truth he had struggled to find was revealed to him in such an absurd way. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, all emotions were gone, replaced by a deathly coldness. He spoke slowly, his voice soft yet carrying an unshakable command. Go, invite Pei Lang to come here. The net of revenge was finally about to tighten. #9. Pei Lang was invited into a secret room in the Ministry of Justice. When he saw Pei Yuan sitting on the upper seat with a frosty expression, all his arrogance vanished instantly. Brother, eldest brother, he stammered. I am not your eldest brother. Pei Yuan's voice was as cold as ice. My mother only has one son. Pei Lang was so frightened that his legs gave way, and he knelt heavily on the ground. Eldest brother, I was wrong. I was talking nonsense just now, don't take it seriously. Pei Yuan ignored his pleas and asked calmly, repeat what you said at the gate just now. What did I say? I don't remember. Pei Lang avoided his gaze, too terrified to look at him. Pei Yuan sneered, he waved his hand. And two expressionless jailers stepped forward, placing a red-hot iron brand in front of Pei Lang. I have many ways to make you remember. Pei Lang had been spoiled since childhood and had never seen such a sight. He was instantly scared out of his wits, crying and confessing everything. He detailed how Liu Rumei had framed me, bribed the peddler, forged evidence, and drugged my soup. Desperate to save his life, he even volunteered a more crucial clue. That maid Xiao Kui who helped my mother back then, I know where she is. My mother was afraid she would leak the secret, so she didn't send her back to her hometown. Instead, she sold her to a brothel in the west of the city. She should still be there, having obtained the clue he needed. A cold light flashed in Pei Yuan's eyes. He did not torment Pei Lang further but had him sent back to the Pei mansion, though not without punishment. When he was sent back, his body was covered with dozens of whiplashes. They were not fatal, but enough to keep him bedridden for months. This was only interest. The real reckoning was yet to come. Pei Yuan immediately sent men to the brothel in the west of the city overnight. When they found Xiao Kui, she was no longer the delicate maid she had once been. Years of torture had left her haggard and inhuman. When she was brought before Pei Yuan and learned his identity, she completely collapsed. She knelt on the ground, weeping bitterly, and confessed all her crimes, how Liu Rumei had coerced and bribed her to drug my sleeping tonic, and how she had betrayed her afterward by selling her into the brothel. My lord, I am unworthy. I am sorry for Lady Shen, but I had no choice. Liu Rumei threatened my entire family's lives. I had to obey. Please spare me, my lord. Please avenge Lady Shen. With witnesses, Pei Lang's confession, and evidence, the time was ripe. Early the next morning, Pei Yuan submitted a memorial to the emperor, requesting a retrial of the case of Shun Shu, wife of former top scholar Pei Wenshuan, accused of adultery 10 years earlier. The emperor's face darkened with anger as he read the shocking allegations. In the imperial capital, there had been such a heinous crime of disregarding human life and framing the descendant of a loyal minister. My father had been a protector general. The emperor immediately issued an edict ordering a joint trial by the three judicial bodies, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Punishments, and the Censorate, with Pei Yuan, Minister of Justice, as the chief judge. As soon as the edict was issued, the entire capital was in an uproar again. No one had expected this old case to be reopened after 13 years, let alone that the chief judge would be the victim's own son. The Pei mansion was thrown into complete chaos. When Liu Rumei heard the news, she fainted on the spot. Pei Wenshuan's face turned ashen. He collapsed into a chair, muttering repeatedly, "It's over, everything is over." He was not a fool. He knew that Pei Yuan, having endured for so many years, would not have dared to bring this matter before the emperor without irrefutable evidence. He knew better than anyone how terrifying his son was. He would not leave them any way to survive. Number 9. On the day of the joint trial by the three judicial bodies, the inside and outside of the Ministry of Justice's court were packed to the brim. Pei Wenshuan, Liu Rumei, and Lady Pei were escorted to the court as suspects, dressed in prison uniforms and shackled. They had long lost their former prestige. Pei Yuan sat solemnly as the chief judge, his imposing official robe accentuating his cold and stern features. Free of any personal emotion, he looked down at the three kneeling before him, his biological father, his stepmother, his grandmother. But in his eyes, they were nothing but criminals. Court in session, the gavel struck, and the entire court fell silent instantly. Bring in the witnesses. Pei Yuan's voice echoed clearly in everyone's ears. The first to be brought in was Xiao Kui, who had been tormented beyond recognition. When Liu Rumei saw her, her pupils contracted sharply, and all color drained from her face. Xiao Kui wept as she recounted all her crimes from that year. Liu Rumei screamed frantically, "Lies, you bitch! It was you who stole from the mansion, that's why I sold you. This is revenge. Whether it is revenge or not, this official will judge fairly." Pei Yuan said expressionlessly, "Bring in the next witness." The second witness was a relative of the peddler who had falsely accused me of adultery. It turned out that not everyone had died in the fire all those years ago. The peddler's younger brother had narrowly escaped and had been living in hiding under an assumed name ever since. It had taken Pei Yuan's men immense effort to find him. Kneeling on the ground, he trembled as he spoke the truth. Back then, the steward of the Pei mansion found my brother and gave him a large sum of money to slander the lady's innocence. My brother was tempted by greed and agreed, but after the deed was done, they feared the truth would come out and set fire to our entire family. I saw it with my own eyes. The man who set the fire was the Pei mansion's steward. As soon as he finished speaking, the elderly steward of the Pei mansion was escorted in from outside. At the sight of the scene, he was so terrified that he wet himself. Before any torture was used, he confessed to everything. He had acted on Liu Rumei's orders to bribe the peddler, and he himself had set the fire that wiped out the peddler's family. With irrefutable evidence, Liu Rumei had no way to defend herself. She collapsed to the ground like a puddle of mud. All eyes turned to Pei Wenshuan. The Minister of Punishments spoke up. "Pei Wenshuan, the case of your wife Shunsha was fraught with doubts. As her husband, why did you hastily drown her in the pond without a thorough investigation? As a scholar and a pillar of the state, how could you be so ruthless, treating human life like grass?" Pei Wenshuan's face was as pale as a sheet, and sweat poured down his face. His lips trembled as he defended himself. I was blinded by anger back then. When I saw that letter, I was overcome with rage and did something terrible. Letter. Pei Yuan interrupted him coldly. "Are you referring to this one?" He picked up a yellowed letter from the table and showed it to everyone. "This is the so-called evidence from back then. This official has invited the best calligraphy expert in the capital to examine it." The expert stated that although the handwriting is an excellent imitation, there are subtle differences from my mother's handwriting in several keystrokes and pauses. Such a close imitation means the forger was very familiar with my mother's handwriting. Pei Yuan's gaze, sharp as a sword, stabbed at Liu Rumei. "Liu Shi, you are my mother's cousin. You studied and wrote together since childhood. Is that not true?" Liu Rumei trembled violently, her face ashen with despair. Pei Yuan then turned to Pei Wenshuan, his voice laced with faint mockery. "Minister Pei, you were married to my mother for 6 years, sharing the same bed, seeing each other every day. Could you really not tell the difference between your wife's own handwriting and a forgery? Or is it that you could tell the difference, but chose not to?" This question struck Pei Wenshuan like a heavy hammer to the heart. He suddenly raised his head, locking eyes with Pei Yuan's piercing, all-knowing gaze. Yes, could he really not tell the difference? No, he just refused to believe it, or rather, he just needed a reason, an excuse, to get rid of me, his wife from a military family, with a strong character, who overshadowed him in every way. My prominent family background had been my support when I married him, but it had also become a thorn in his side. As a top scholar from a humble background marrying a general's daughter, everyone said he had climbed the social ladder. On the surface, he was deeply grateful, but in his heart, he was filled with inferiority and resentment. Liu Rumei's appearance had given him the perfect opportunity, a chance to eliminate me and marry his gentle, obedient cousin in my place. So he had chosen to believe those shoddy pieces of evidence. He had chosen to push me into the abyss with his own hands. Pei Yuan saw through all of this. You are not stupid. Pei Yuan looked at him, delivering his final verdict word by word. You are just evil. At this moment, all of Pei Wenshuan's defenses collapsed completely. He collapsed to the ground. Weeping bitterly like a lost child, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. Qingning, I'm sorry for you. His confession had come too late, 13 years too late. I floated in mid-air, watching him coldly. My heart had long since died in the icy river water all those years ago. Number 10, the case was now clear: framing, murder, arson, mass murder. Each crime was punishable by death. The final verdict was handed down. Liu Rumei, as the mastermind, was sentenced to death by Ling Kai, death by 1,000 cuts. To be carried out in 3 days. The elderly steward of the Pei mansion, as an accomplice, was sentenced to immediate beheading. Pei Wenshuan, though not directly involved in the murder, had listened to slander and wrongfully killed his first wife as her husband, a crime unforgivable. Out of consideration for his past achievements as a top scholar, the emperor spared his life, sentencing him to exile 3,000 li away, never to return to the capital. As for Lady Pei, she was guilty of cover-up and complicity, but due to her advanced age, she was sentenced to life imprisonment in the Pei family's old residence. Under official supervision, the Pei family had fallen completely. All their property was confiscated. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. All the servants and relatives who had once clung to the Pei family fled in all directions. The once grand Pei mansion became an empty, haunted house overnight. At the moment the verdict was announced, I looked at my Yuan. He remained expressionless, as if none of this concerned him, but I knew that in his heart, the mountain that had weighed on him for 13 years had finally been lifted. On the day Liu Rumei was escorted to the execution ground. The streets were empty. Everyone wanted to see the fate of this vicious woman. I did not go. I could not bear to look at that ugly face again. I just floated above the Pei mansion, watching the cage that had once trapped me and my son. The day Pei Wenshuan was escorted out of the capital into exile in the northern border, it rained heavily. Dressed in prison clothes, manacled hand and foot, he was haggard with grey hair, a far cry from the handsome top scholar he had once been. The prison cart passed a restaurant. By the window on the second floor sat a figure. It was Pei Yuan. He did not look at the prison cart below, but sat quietly, pouring wine for himself. Pei Wenshuan seemed to sense something. He looked up and saw the figure. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but in the end, nothing came out. Turbid tears mixed with rainwater streamed down his wrinkled face. Father and son stared at each other from afar through the rain curtain. It was the last time they would ever see each other. I knew that Pei Yuan had chosen to see him off here not to say goodbye, but to mourn the illusion of a father that had been killed by Pei Wenshuan's own hands on that winter day 13 years ago, and to mourn the lonely, helpless boy who had struggled alone in endless darkness for 10 years. From now on, there would be no more Pei Wenshuan, no more father-son bond, only a blood feud. Number 11, the revenge was complete. But I did not feel relieved. My spirit was still trapped in the Pei mansion. This mansion had now become my cage. Pei Yuan had become the most powerful young minister in the capital. At 23, he was already Minister of Justice, deeply trusted by the emperor. 2 years later, the old emperor passed away, and the crown prince ascended the throne. As the crown prince's confidant, Pei Yuan was entrusted with important responsibilities. Directly entering the Grand Secretariat and becoming the youngest auxiliary minister in the dynasty, at 28, he held unparalleled power, reaching the pinnacle of officialdom as Grand Secretary. He had fulfilled the oath he had made in his youth, but he was growing increasingly unhappy. He remained alone, no wife, no concubines, The emperor tried repeatedly to arrange a marriage for him, but he politely declined each time. He said he did not wish to be troubled by worldly affairs for the rest of his life. I knew he was afraid of repeating the past, afraid of experiencing betrayal and hurt again. My tragedy had become an unhealable wound in his heart. He devoted all his time and energy to state affairs. He rectified official administration, implemented new laws, and did many good deeds for the people. The people praised him as an honest and upright official, but only I knew that every night, when all was quiet, he would go alone to the courtyard where I had once lived. He had ordered the courtyard to be sealed, preserving it exactly as it was when I left. He would sit under the window where I had once sat, staying there all night. He never spoke, just watched silently, watched my dressing table, watched the crabapple tree I had planted with my own hands. I floated beside him, wanting to say, "Yuan, don't be like this, mother's heart aches," but he could not hear me. He just immersed himself in his own world, wrapped in endless longing and sorrow, watching his increasingly haggard face, the overwhelming exhaustion and loneliness in his eyes. My heart felt as if it were being cut by a knife. I had exhausted all my strength to avenge myself, but my son was forever trapped in the past. What should I do? How could I help him move on? Number 12, after becoming Grand Secretary, the first thing Pei Yuan did was to clear my name completely. Though the joint trial by the 3 judicial bodies had already vindicated me years earlier, he felt it was not enough. He wanted the entire world to know that his mother, Shen Qingning, was a chaste and righteous woman who had been wrongfully killed. He personally wrote a memorial requesting the emperor to posthumously confer upon me the title of first-class imperial consort and erect a memorial archway in honor of my chastity. The new emperor, grateful for his merits and sympathetic to his suffering, immediately approved the request. Not only did he posthumously appoint me as first-class imperial consort, but he also ordered the construction of a grand chastity archway in my hometown. Meanwhile, he issued an edict to have my coffin exhumed from the mass grave, reburied with the ceremonies due to a first-class imperial consort, and interred in the Pei family's ancestral tomb. No, not the Pei family's ancestral tomb. The Pei family no longer had an ancestral tomb. Pei Yuan used all his savings to purchase a piece of auspicious land on the outskirts of the capital, where he built a mausoleum for me. He also memorialized the emperor to restore the reputation of my maternal clan, the Shen family. From that day on, he no longer bore the surname Pei. His name was Shen Yuan. On the day of the reburial, he personally escorted the coffin. The journey from the mass grave to the mausoleum on the outskirts of the capital was dozens of li long, and he walked every step of the way, dressed in heavy mourning garments. His face was pale and his expression solemn. The onlooking commoners were all moved. At the moment my coffin was slowly lowered into the tomb, I felt the force binding me seem to loosen. I was no longer trapped in the Pei mansion. I could follow my Yuan, stay by his side. I floated behind him, watching as he personally erected my tombstone with his own hands. There were no extra words on the stone, only, "Tomb of my beloved mother Shen Qingning," erected by her unfilial son Yuan. After burying me, he knelt before my tomb, refusing to rise. He knelt from mid-morning until sunset. The mute old woman paced anxiously beside him, urging him repeatedly, but he remained motionless, like a stone statue. Once again, it began to rain, cold, biting rain, just like the day I died. The rain soaked his clothes, streaming down his haggard cheeks. I could not tell if they were raindrops or tears. For more than 10 years, I had never seen him cry. No matter how much suffering or humiliation he endured, he had never shed a single tear. But today, in this place that belonged only to the two of us, he finally let go of all his pretense and strength. Like a child, he leaned against my tombstone, and the pain and longing he had suppressed for more than a decade erupted completely at that moment. "Mother." His hoarse voice was filled with endless grievance and sorrow. "Your son is unfilial. I made you wait for 10 years. Mother, I miss you so much. All these years, I've been so tired." He cried out, over and over, like an injured young beast licking its wounds. I stretched out my hand, wanting to embrace him, to stroke his head. This time, my hand passed through the rain curtain and landed truly, Gently, on the top of his head, he seemed to feel something. His crying gradually subsided. He slowly raised his head, his red, swollen eyes staring blankly around him. "Mother, is that you?" I summoned all my strength, wanting him to see me, wanting him to hear my voice. "Yuan, Mother is here." My voice was very soft, like a light breeze, but he seemed to hear it. His eyes suddenly lit up. He looked in my direction, and a childlike smile, one I had never seen before, appeared on his face. "Mother, I can see you." I looked at him and smiled too, smiling. Tears streamed down my face. It turned out that even ghosts could cry. My body began to fade, becoming transparent. I knew my time was short. I said to him, "Yuan, don't be afraid. Live well, live for yourself, marry, have children, and experience the joys and sorrows of this world like an ordinary person. Mother will watch over you from heaven always." Tears poured down his face even more fiercely. He stretched out his hand desperately, trying to grasp me. "Mother, don't go, don't leave me." I looked at him one last time, engraving his appearance at this moment deeply in my heart. Then my body turned into bits of starlight, dissipating into the wind and rain. At that moment, I felt an unprecedented sense of ease and relief. I knew I could finally leave in peace, because my Yuan was strong enough now to face the world alone, and the last words I left him would guide him for the rest of his life, leading him out of the shadow of hatred to embrace a life truly his own. Yuan. Mother is leaving. You must be well. Epilogue. Shen Yuan's perspective. My name is Shen Yuan. In my memories before the age of 5, the world was warm. There was my mother's warm embrace, the sweet-scented osmanthus cakes she made with her own hands, and the gentle sound of her teaching me to read by the lamp every night. She always said, "My Yuan, you must grow up to be a man of integrity, with a heart for the world and a desire to help all people." I did not understand these great principles back then. I only knew that I loved seeing her smile. When she smiled, her eyes curved like crescent moons, brighter than the stars in the sky. But when I was 5 years old, my world collapsed. They said my mother had been unfaithful, had committed adultery. They stuffed her into a pig cage and sank her into the icy river. I watched with my own eyes as the person I loved most disappeared before me. At that moment, something in my heart died along with her. From then on, my world was only black and white, an endless hatred. Father, the man I had once admired and looked up to, became my most hated enemy. He called me a bastard and whipped me with a horsewhip. Stepmother, that woman with a smile like honey and a heart like poison, tormented me in every way she could. They all wanted me dead, but I refused to give them the satisfaction, like a weed struggling to grow in the cracks of stones. I fought desperately to survive, because I knew that if I died, no one would ever clear my mother's name. I began to study secretly. On those most unbearable nights, the words in the books gave me the only light. I told myself to endure until I had enough power to crush all of them under my feet. At the age of 15, I left that hellish home. At 18, I achieved the rare feat of topping all 3 rounds of the imperial examination, becoming the youngest top scholar in the dynasty. Everyone thought I had risen suddenly, but only I knew what it had cost me: countless sleepless nights, blood, and tears. I entered the court and climbed the ranks step by step. I became cold, ruthless, and unscrupulous. Everyone who stood in my way became a stepping stone. They all feared me, calling me an emotionless monster. They did not know that all my emotions had been buried along with my mother's death. I finally became Grand Secretary, a man who held the power to control the entire court. I cleared my mother's name and sent all my enemies to hell. At the moment my revenge was complete, I did not feel the joy I had imagined, only endless emptiness. I stood at the pinnacle of power, yet felt like a wandering ghost. Until that day, at my mother's tomb, I saw her again. She looked just as I remembered, gentle and beautiful. She said to me, "Yuan, live well." At that moment, my long-dead heart seemed to beat again. I finally understood that revenge was not the entire meaning of my life. What my mother had wanted was not a son consumed by hatred. She had wanted a son who could live well and feel happiness. I obeyed my mother's last wish. I began to try to live an ordinary life. At the age of 30, I married. It was an imperial marriage arranged by the emperor, the daughter of a general. She had a bright, unrestrained personality, like a flame illuminating my cold world. We treated each other with respect, and gradually, affection grew between us. We had 2 children, a son and a daughter. My son was like me, calm and introverted. My daughter was like her, lively and lovely. I was no longer the lonely Shen Yuan. I had a family, a weakness, and also armor. I was still the powerful Grand Secretary, but I was no longer cold. I would get angry when my daughter broke my beloved inkstone, and feel gratified when my son made progress in his studies. I would accompany my wife under the crabapple tree in the backyard, watching the sunrise and sunset. That crabapple tree was transplanted from the old Pei mansion. It was the one my mother had planted with her own hands. Every time I saw it, I thought of her. I would tell my children that they had an extraordinary grandmother, gentle, resilient, and the best person in the world. I lived to be 80 years old. I had a large family with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and countless disciples who spread my teachings across the land. I assisted 3 emperors and helped establish a prosperous age. In the history books, I am known as the greatest prime minister of all time. On my deathbed, as I lay in bed, I had a vision. I saw her again, still young and beautiful, standing in a brilliant light, reaching out her hand to me. "Yuan, it's time to come home." I smiled. "Mother, I'm coming." My life had been magnificent, yet I had also fallen into the deepest abyss, but I had no regrets, because I knew that no matter where I went, there would always be someone watching over me gently from heaven. "Thank you, Mother, you gave me life twice, once in body, and once in soul." The end.